Welcome everyone. Today my guest is Matt Kennard. Matt is a British investigative journalist and author known for his in-depth reporting on UK foreign policy, military operations and intelligence activities. He co-founded Declassified UK in 2019 and he remained there till 2024. Matt's work has extensively covered the British military presence in Cyprus, particularly focusing in the sovereign base areas of the Gaza and Akrotiri and their role in the UK and US military operations in the Middle East. And in that regard, this is of particular importance to us as Cypriots, and this podcast focuses on the role and operations of the British bases in Cyprus in collaboration with the United States. So here is the podcast, a very interesting discussion with Matt Kennard. So Matt, thank you for appearing to the show. I would like to start first of all with the British bases in Cyprus and their role. And if you can make like a short historical introduction on the subject, when the British bases were created and for what purpose exactly?
Well, I think that the military and intelligence bases, because they're also big intelligence stations as well, were created in the early part of the 20th century. But when Cyprus was still ruled by Britain. But when Cyprus got independence in 1960, or so-called independence, Britain retained 3% of the island. And on those territories, they built a huge, or there was a base, but they built a huge RAF base, which is RAF Akrotiri, which everyone in Cyprus will probably know. Yeah. And then in the eastern part of the island, they built this huge intelligence station called Nikolaos. There's a station, the actual station there is called Ayios Nikolaos station. It's amazing because they're effectively colonies. They're not called colonies, obviously, they're called bases, but bases usually are just small, well, they can be big, but they're just military installations, whereas the sovereign base areas, the so-called sovereign base areas or SBAs, are huge swathes of territories which have bases on them, but also people live on them. Obviously, it's 3% of the island. It's not an insignificant amount of land. And interestingly as well, there were, which is not talked about enough, is that there were also retained sites which were retained by the British. One is RAF Troodos near the border with northern Cyprus, which is another occupation, obviously. So I did some work actually in the archives in the UK, and it showed that immediately after independence, the British were taking what we say in Britain, taking the piss with these territories, because as you know, President Archbishop Makarios III, who was the first democratically elected leader of independent Cyprus, he was one of the key people in the non-aligned movement, which wanted to forge an independent path between East and the West, the Soviet Union and the United States. And the British knew this, but despite this, secretly turned these sites into key NATO assets during the Cold War. And I found a top secret Ministry of Defense document which showed that they did that. And they were aware. That document says, so this is high-level senior military officials saying, we are aware this is inconsistent with Cyprus's non-aligned stance, so we have to keep it secret. And there would be outrage, and it carries on all the way up to the present. You know, the British use these exactly how they want, and they have no regard for Cypriot political priorities or Cypriot security. Because the other point about this is to bring you up to the present. This is I believe that RAF Akrotiri Nikolaos, that it's the key node for the US and the UK to dominate the region, to dominate the Middle East and North Africa. If you look at all the wars that have been fought by the British and Americans, and they, as we know, they often work in a team, or nearly always work in a team, they use RF Akrotiri for their bombing missions. Well, it's become an issue, as you know, on the island recently with the Gaza genocide, but it's also been used regularly to bomb Yemen. It has been used to bomb Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. So this is and another key component of this is that. And this is again is a piss take to the Cypriots, is that it's an unofficial joint base with the Americans, all of the stations. So RF Akrotiri has had a US military presence for over 50 years, and they have acknowledged that the US is there, but they never said how many soldiers or airmen, and they never said what units. Now, for Declassified, when I worked there, I revealed for the first time how many US airmen are permanently stationed at RF Akrotiri. It's 129, and there's a whole spy unit which is permanently based there as well. And then in Dekelia, again, there's not officially an American presence, but Edward Snowden's leaks in 2013 showed that half of the funding for Ayios Nikolaos station is provided by the National Security Agency, which is a US agency. And actually, in those Edward Snowden leaks, it said that US spies that go into that base have to dress as tourists because they don't want to they don't want to let the Cypriots know that it's a joint base. So it's very interesting. I mean, there are joint bases around the world, US-UK joint bases, which are official, like Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. That's officially a joint base. But Akrotiri and Dekelia are not meant to be officially joint bases, but they are. And it's the key node, as I said, that the Americans use to dominate the region as well. So it's very interesting. And it's also another interesting part of it is, I think it's quite well known about in Cyprus, especially now, but barely anyone in the UK knows that we still retain 3% of Cyprus, which is outrageous because it goes to the heart of what Britain's role in the world is. You know, we're told that the British Empire ended and our desire to dominate the world and own it effectively ended. But Cyprus is a very good example of why that never happened. And also the other point is, I mean, even when they have to defend it, the Cypriot government and stuff, well, they say it protects us. But it didn't protect Cyprus against the invasion of 1974 and the occupation, which has continued ever since.
Exactly.
Cyprus, I believe, doesn't need this for their security. In fact, and we'll come on to this, obviously, its role in the Israeli genocide in Gaza. But many people have said, including politicians that I've interviewed in the UK, that the actions that are happening now to support Israel are making Cyprus a target of militant groups because it's obviously the key place that...
the center of operations.
Sorry?
It is the center of operations of the British army here.
Exactly. And also, well, we can come on to this. I don't know if you want me to move on to it now, but
at this stage, I would like to show on the screen one of the maps that you have published in Declassified, which shows the British bases and the US spy facilities, as you call them. So we have the bases in Akrotiri and the Gaza, and also Ayios, Nikolaos, and the RAF facility in Troodos, which is part of the retained territories. And I've seen in your publications, you talk a lot about the actual use of those bases there, which is to collect information, to scan emails, text messages, and all this. You can talk a little bit about that,
sure,
of the actual use.
Yeah, and I would say there is a different regulatory environment in these sovereign base areas to Britain itself. So, for example, as a journalist, you can send Freedom of Information Act requests for information about UK bases around the world or UK bases within the UK, but you can't on the sovereign base areas. So that
really,
you can't.
Oh.
So and it's very, very hard to get any information because. And a lot of people know this, the governance system of the SBAs, which is completely unique even within British overseas territories, of which there are 14. But all of the ones that have inhabitants, like the SBAs, have some kind of governance system with legislature. You know, they have elections and but in the SBAs, all legislative and executive power resides in one man or woman called the administrator, who's appointed by the Ministry of Defence in London. So it's run as a military dictatorship. It's obviously doesn't have. It's not like Myanmar or somewhere. You're not going to get arrested for. But the actual governance structure is a military dictatorship. It's a military official who's appointed by the UK military in London. So. And part of that is because obviously the national security state, the war industries, and the Ministry of Defence and Intelligence agencies, if they're using this to dominate the Middle East, they want as much secrecy as possible. So they don't want journalists to be able to get information. So, the slide you just put up, we only know about all this stuff because of Edward Snowden. So his leaks in 2013, which covered, he was working for the National Security Agency. But their partner is GCHQ in which is based.
Let's explain what these two entities are: the NSA and the GCHQ.
Yeah, so NSA is the premier surveillance agency in the United States. It collects intelligence around the world and actually within the US itself for the United States government. And in the UK, its partner is GCHQ. And GCHQ is the largest intelligence agency in Britain by quite a distance. It's based in Cheltenham, and again, it's also it's a surveillance agency. Its role is to gather information. It's much bigger than MI5 and MI6, but GCHQ runs Ayios, Nikolaos' site. And anyway, so the Edward Snowden leaks showed how prevalent UK, which we kind of assumed, obviously, but how prevalent US spies were. And as you say, these sites are doing ELINT, which is electronic intelligence. They're gathering emails, phone calls from all over North Africa, the Middle East, and processing them for use by the government. And then obviously they have partnerships with Israel as well, which is very, very close. And in terms of the role that the SBAs have played in the genocide in Gaza, we actually know some, mainly because of the work we were doing, but we know quite a lot about what's happening with the military side of things from Akrotiri, but we know zero about how these spy sites, the spy assets, the GCHQ NSA sites have been used to help Israel. And we might never know that because they're completely secret agencies, you can't get any information about them. And that's not to protect us, that's to protect them from us, because they don't want to have to reveal the deep complicity in this crime and plenty of other crimes. But and Troodos again is the highest point in Cyprus, I think.
Yes, it is.
It's the perfect place to gather satellite intelligence, to gather all sorts of different intelligence. There's one called MASINT, which is measures and signature intelligence, which is another highly technical form of intelligence. But it's an outrage, really, when they're using Cyprus, which is supposed to be an independent country, and secretly using it to spy on all over the Middle East and North Africa, and not even divulge any information about what is going on, and making Cyprus, I believe, a target in a sense. So, and again, this side of things is not talked about as much as the military. Akrotiri is well known, but I actually think the intelligence side might be more important. It's such a strategic location, Cyprus, as you know, on the Eastern Mediterranean. And the United States and UK is using it to dominate, to gather intelligence, and to exert power across the Middle East and North Africa.
And from your publications and investigative work, we know for certain that the US uses the bases for military purposes here. And in addition, you started recently to publish the routes of planes in your Twitter account on X, right? Where do you find this information, and how do you authenticate the validity of this information, like the codes of planes that I see, and it's a military plane, a spy plane, and so forth? Yeah, so from the beginning of Israel's campaign in Gaza, the US and UK have been using Akrotiri to fly to Tel Aviv, but also other airports, and Nevatim, which is the main military airport in Israel. And it's a good question you ask, because originally I'd been to the SBAs in 2022. So
when the genocide began and you were seeing such horrendous war crimes every day, I was thinking, well, Akrotiri sits a 40-minute flight time from Israel. They must be using this to supply and support. So I contacted the Ministry of Defence in London. I said, can you let me know how many flights have gone from Akrotiri? This was maybe a month in. They refused. So in that context, when I couldn't get any information through official channels, I started using flight tracker websites, which I'd never used before, but now I know like the back of my hand because I've been using them for 2 years. But there was one of those sites. There's a few, but one of them was puts up the not all actually, because I think some of them go secretly and aren't put there, but they put up some of the flights that are going, and they showed in the case of the Gaza situation, they showed that soon after October 7th, daily military transport flights were being flown by the RAF to Tel Aviv. And these were huge aircraft. They're called C-17s and A400Ms. They can carry 150 troops. They can carry Chinook helicopters, all sorts of weaponry. So, and we still to this day don't know. There were 48 that went up to January. So, and in some periods every day, as I said, and that's all that we know. We still don't know what were on those planes. When they had to defend it, because they were asked questions in Parliament, the UK government would say, well, it was medical equipment and we were moving ministers, but hardly any ministers went in that period. And you can't, there's the medical equipment excuse doesn't make sense. So we still don't know. And then in December 2023, the UK government announced that they were going to start spy flights. They didn't say how many or where they were going to go from or what plane it was, but I started seeing that they were coming up on this website. And this is a plane called the Shadow R1, which the British have flown every day nearly since December 2023 from Akrotiri over Gaza for 5 hours, and some days for 10 hours. There's been 2 flights, and they're using Akrotiri for that. Again, they've never officially said any of the information that I've revealed, but to answer your question directly, that's how I got the information. Flight tracker websites. Also, there have been some good MPs in the British Parliament who have been using the different mechanisms within the British Parliament to get information. But again, they keep banging their head against the wall in the sense that there's a cover-up. And in fact, I interviewed Jeremy Corbyn this week, and he said to me there's absolutely a cover-up going on because he has called for a independent inquiry into Britain's role in the Gaza genocide. And he's now introduced a bill into Parliament. And he said, and in the wording of that bill, RAF Akrotiri is mentioned. He said we need transparency about how RAF Akrotiri is being used. So it's being used, what we know about, for military transport flights and spy planes by the British. Now, on the American side, they were also sending military transport flights, same vehicles from Akrotiri, but they weren't coming up as much. And interestingly, there's another part of this which I did some work on, which is they were sending these planes called C-295 planes, which are smaller planes, and in fact they weren't flagged as US Air Force originally when I was looking at them. So I was for a long time I was confused about what they were. Then I started comparing their serial number with using it with other websites and found out that it was registered to the US Air Force. And then I found out from doing some research that they're used by special forces and often a company like the president if he goes to Ukraine or something. But they were flying regularly. And in fact, there was one this week that went to Tel Aviv from RAF Akrotiri, US Air Force C-295. And again, we don't know anything about what those planes have them on. Have they got special forces soldiers? Have they got, I don't know, any military personnel, spies? Because the other thing about the SBAs is on the US side, you can get even less information than the UK side. So when we asked about these American planes, the UK government, any question about the US Air Force activity on Cyprus, on the UK sites on Cyprus, they say we don't comment on allies' activities on our bases, which is outrageous. But so we don't know anything. And after this, I think that in the grand scheme of things, what I've told you, we know and is factual and is been proven. We've not had anyone say that it's not factual, but we're still scratching the surface because we've had to use open source information. And any public inquiry which Jeremy Corbyn's calling for, if the ICC and ICJ involve the UK ministers and the UK state in their legal proceedings, we'll find out. I think once we start digging a bit deeper, we'll find out that the complicity and the participation is much deeper than we even know.
Matt, about the role of the US specifically, you have you did a publication on X showing that some of the US planes fly from Akrotiri to Turkey and back.
Oh, yeah.
And this is important also for us because, as you indicated very correctly before, Turkey is an occupator and occupies by force 40% of our island. And the other thing that you have revealed in your articles is that NSA is funding 50% of Ayios Nikolaos operations. So again, here we observe an active US involvement together with information about the 129 agents or military personnel, US military personnel in Akrotiri. So all this show that there is an active presence and operations and cooperation between the US and the UK here. And without the Cypriot government, I guess, being involved in all this.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, that is the situation. So there was a question put down in Parliament by an MP asking this very question. They said, is the Cypriot government made aware of operations that are run out of the SBAs? And the minister responded that sometimes we do, but there is no obligation to. So that in the system that was set up in 1960, there's no need for the British to say anything, which is insane, really, if you think about it. Because obviously, if you're running war and intelligence operations from an island, that has implications not just for security, but primarily security for the. So there should be some mechanism where everything that's going on in the SBAs is made available. But interestingly, the Cypriot government, I don't know too much about the domestic politics, but they haven't been vocal in condemning, or they basically denied it whenever they've been asked. The president was asked at various points about RF Akrotiri being used to supply Israel, and he said, "We're not used for war. We're not used for war operations," or something along those lines, which is completely false. But maybe he said that because he doesn't know, or that's his plausible deniability. But anyway, yes, it is. And the interesting thing is, like you said, like it's not just the US and the UK, although it is, if early articles in Haaretz, which is the Israeli newspaper, they said that special forces from Denmark, Germany had also been deployed to RAF Akrotiri. And interestingly, I should mention this as well, the special forces of the UK, it was leaked that they were deployed to Cyprus in late October 2023, and we still don't know what they've been doing for a year and a half. So you have all these different militaries gathering in RAF Akrotiri to support Israel. And then to go to the question about Turkey, again, of course, this is very, very interesting as well, and is very important because Erdogan has talked endlessly about condemning the genocide, which I welcome, but the reality of how he's acted completely belies that rhetoric. You know, they're supplying tons of oil to Israel, and as you say, there's this huge base in, and obviously Turkey is a NATO country as well, so it's effectively under the control of the Americans. But there's a huge base called Incirlik at Adana in southern Turkey, and that has 5,000 US troops. And I started seeing regular military transport flights, huge vehicles again, that were going from Incirlik to RAF Akrotiri and then back to Incirlik. So obviously they were dropping something off. Again, we don't know, we're not allowed to ask or know what those US flights had on them, but but we know that the US Air Force has been dropping weaponry at RAF Akrotiri from around Europe, from depots around Europe. That was also in Haaretz. So it could be that, it could be personnel, it could be weapons, we don't know. But again, it caused quite a scene in Turkey, because Turkey likes the Turkish people listen to their president and think that they're against the genocide, and then they're hearing that maybe they're materially complicit in it. The truth is that you never know what really happens in the background. Prime Minister Starmer was here a while ago, and he went to the British bases in Akrotiri, and he gave a speech, and some clips were shown in the local TV stations. But I heard him a couple of days ago in the British Parliament. He said he condemned the Israeli escalation in Gaza, and he indicated in a way that there would be repercussions and everything. But again, you see, in the background,
the spying continues and the operation. So it's like a two faces thing. It's what we see and what takes place behind the curtains.
Yeah, and what's amazing about it is that he gets away with it because the media don't cover it. Everything I've told you is basically stories that I did. And you're talking about one of the most horrendous crimes of the modern era, and the British evidence that is easy to find, that the British are deeply complicit and participants, I believe, because I think if you're passing intelligence to a genocidal power which is carrying out war crimes and being investigated for that, then you're a participant. You can't give intelligence and say, well, we're not involved. So, but the UK on the spy flights thing, like you said, so Starmer went to Akrotiri last year and said, we're all proud of what you're doing here, even though we can't tell the world what that is. Well, I think what that meant was participating in genocide, but there was no coverage in the media. And then when you, as you said, when he made that statement about Israel, that a couple of hours after, there was a spy flight sent from Akrotiri and a military transport flight. So, and I think he would be come under some pressure to deal with that contradiction that you mentioned between the reality and the rhetoric if the media covered it. But he's never been asked a single question by a mainstream journalist since he became prime minister about the spy flights. Not one, which is amazing obedience to authority. And as I say, it's not hard to get this information. Any journalist can go on these flight tracker websites and see this stuff. But there's not a willingness to do it, and I don't know why. Like there's deep structural reasons, but it has been quite shocking because, as you know, even when we were doing the stories in early 2024, it became such an issue in Cyprus that the president of Cyprus had to make a comment on it. Was asked about it. The president of occupied Northern Cyprus had to make a comment on it, and still, even in that context, it wasn't getting into the media here. So it's crazy.
I would like to indicate to our viewers that from the map that I showed before, all the bases are in the free part of Cyprus and there are none in the occupied part. And I guess there Turkey manages the game and the spying and everything. And Matt, you have been a journalist in the Financial Times. You have a lot of experience with the so-called legacy media. And you said before that they don't touch this issue. Even newspapers like The Guardian, even in our island, the legacy media, apart from a couple of publications, they don't really look into it. Why do you think this is it? Is there a conspiracy to silence all about this? Do you have an explanation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a combination of things. So one is very specific. In the UK, we have a system called the D-Notice system, which is the UK military and intelligence officials have this committee where they can send out advisories to tell the media not to publish certain information. And one was sent out about the special forces being deployed to Cyprus for Gaza operations. And since that came out, we know nothing about what the special forces have been up to in Gaza or Israel. So we know that. That might be one reason why we don't know anything about that story. And there might be other D-notices that are about other issues that we don't know about, because the other thing about D-notice, if it's sent out, you're not allowed to publicize it. So we don't even know they exist. So there's that. But I think maybe a more important part of it is that the media don't see its role as exposing the real systemic crimes of our country and our system. They can do small scandals and sort of surface stories which don't really expose the true reality of the British state. But when you're talking about stories like this, which again are using open source, even that map you put, why has no one made that map? Why did we make that map and no one else made that? Those documents are up from Edward Snowden. It's obviously very, very important to know, and this is information they didn't want us to know. So as a journalist, this is great, but yeah, no one touched it. So I think that partly it's because the British mainstream media is very, very aligned and the same sort of people as the British establishment, and they don't see their role as exposing the real imperial crimes of them. And within Cyprus itself, there has been some media coverage, like the Cyprus Mail, Phil News,
and Philae News.
Yeah, Philae News, exactly. But the sort of mainstream. I can't remember what the main newspaper is, but they published a hit piece.
Yeah, you see, it was covered by Cyprus Mail and the Phile News English version, which is read primarily by British people and foreigners, but in the Greek versions of the Phile News and other big newspapers, it was not covered for the Greek audience to take notice, or in the news, in the major TV channels. So, and again, this should be read together with the stance of governments in Cyprus for so many years, not to comment on the British bases, not to open a discussion about the legitimacy of having British bases in 2025. And generally, there is a silence agreement by all the main actors. And this takes me to the recent case of the Chagos Archipelago. I don't know if you have followed this case. I guess you did. And the decision of the International Court of Justice. Do you think that if Cypriots were to reclaim their sovereignty, what do you think would be the opinion of the British public opinion?
Well, the interesting part of that question is I think most people don't even know that we have these 3% of Ireland, Cyprus is still owned by Britain. So I think people would be shocked, but I think if they were explaining the situation, they would be pro shutting them down, because as you said, it's a relic. It's from a different era. It's from an era of the British Empire and the British Imperial. Well, we still live in it, but what I mean is, in our heads, we think we're past that. So when people hear that, they're shocked. And I also think that it doesn't make Cyprus any safer. That's the thing. I don't think it, as I said, I didn't protect them from the Turkish invasion and occupation. And I think that they know all this. They know that the British do, and probably the Cypriot government. And as you say, I think part of the reason the Cypriot government and the media class are so quiet about it is because the British sort of set up a lot of infrastructure to try and make to make the establishment in Cyprus defend it, or at least stay silent on it. And the other point is they keep it very quiet, and they know, because they know it's indefensible. So I don't know if you've probably been to the SBAs, right? You don't know you're moving onto UK territory. There's no flags. There's no border. They keep it.
No border.
In fact, when I was on Akrotiri, the whole part, I literally saw like one Union Jack flag, and the same in Decalia, because they don't want people to really understand that they still have these colonies. That's why the stories that came out and the role it has played in Israel and Gaza has been so problematic for the British, because they've had to actually defend these colonies, which most people don't even know exist. And even Cypriots. So when I was on Akrotiri, I interviewed Cypriots who were on Akrotiri. And I said, do you know you're on UK sovereign territory here? And they said, no, we didn't. We didn't have any idea. And tourists didn't. And obviously they know that it's a completely different situation with the Turkish occupation, because it's a very, very live issue in Cyprus. Since it began. And the Turkish side, if you go to the Turkish border, they have them huge obnoxious flags on the hills. So the British don't want to create that kind of same anger and ire against the British occupation, but they're both illegitimate and they both should be shut down. They should, but Cypriot belongs to the Cypriot people. It should be an independent country. The problem it has, or the curse that it has, is it sits in such a geostrategically important place that it's always been coveted by imperial powers. That's why, including the Ottomans, before the British. But I think that just to go to the question of whether they could be shut down or shut down, there's no real momentum in the UK, because most people don't even know about it. The media hasn't covered it. Although there is, Code Pink have started a whole campaign to shut down the US-UK bases. But within Cyprus itself, from what I can see, and you know more about this than me, but there is some momentum and people are talking about it a lot more. There's protests because there's a strong pro-Palestinian movement in Cyprus, and the Cypriot people, or the people who are in that political camp, are outraged that their land is being used secretly to play a key role in the destruction, which is what it is, of the Palestinian people. Gaza is destroyed. So I think that we, as people who who are anti-imperialists, and we should all be anti-imperialists because countries should be able to run their own affairs. They shouldn't be running the interests of foreign powers. Have an opportunity now to really to use this momentum to make it a political issue and to make it mainstream. Because as you said, the mainstream parties don't want to talk about it. But if there's enough people coming, and also I would say it would be a massive service to the people of the Middle East as well, because it's not, as I said, it's not just Gaza. This is a central place that the US and UK use to bomb people all over the Middle East. So it's a way that the people of Cyprus, if they could get it shut down, could help the peace and security in the Middle East a lot.
Yeah. Matt, my final question. Do you have any idea how much does it cost to the British taxpayer to maintain the bases in Cyprus?
Yeah. So it's £20 million a year, but that's only what we know about. That's what British Forces Cyprus costs. But the costs are much that we don't know the intelligence side of things. So I would say, from what I know, it'd be way more than double that. So it could be up to 100 million. We don't know. And they increased the troop presence by 1,000 troops as well. At one point in Cyprus, there's 3,000 now UK troops, and we don't know how many US personnel. But I think officially it's £20 million a year. Go on, sorry.
You know, in the agreements in 1960, the British were supposed to pay rent to the Cypriot government, which was paid for the first 2-3 years, and then they stopped paying.
Yeah, it's mad. And sorry, I should mention this as well. It's not so the agreement was quite interesting. So they had the official sites, and as I mentioned, the retained sites, but there's also training areas as well. Just like little bits of land in the middle of nowhere that are training areas that the UK effectively own. So it's I don't know. I was always quite surprised because I went there, as I said before, the Israel-Gaza situation, and I was quite surprised at how okay the Cypriots were with it. But I think partly that was because the narrative that's been pushed when they have to defend them is that this is what keeps us safe. It's our guarantee. Yes, our insurance.
Exactly.
But I think most people see through that now. I mean, obviously we want Cyprus to be safe, but I actually think that these bases and these intelligence stations are making Cypriots less safe.
Well, they didn't save us in 1974, so
exactly.
You have that for granted.
And it's not there. They're not. The British aren't there to. I mean, that's imperial powers always say that. They say, well, we're there. Well, I'm sure in 1960 they defended it by saying we need to guarantee new independent Cyprus. But of course they weren't. They were there because they wanted to retain this hugely important site in the Eastern Mediterranean. And they're not in the Falklands to guarantee security for Brazil or Argentina, are they? They're there because it's a massive military and intelligence stations. They're not in Diego Garcia for the Indian Ocean security. Security is not a priority for them. Their priority is to project power. And Cyprus is maybe the most important overseas territory for Britain and maybe the Americans to do that in the Middle East.
Yeah. Matt, thank you so much for your comments, the insight. Keep up the good work. And I hope the Cypriot people wake up as well and pose some basic questions to our government. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. See you soon.